Okay. So first off, after the class last week, we had a couple of us had a conversation um, about the timeline. I'm gonna scroll down to this one real quick. We talked a little bit about this in the class, but you can see that there's two um, clumps of uh, prophets. Basically, you want to look at it that way. You've got this group here, and then this group over here. You could look at this group and refer to that group as the Assyrian prophets, right? Because we talked about the two of the three crises, the Assyrian crisis and the Babylonian crisis. And the prophets tend to be kind of lumped around that because that was a great time of need for the Israelites. When you look, if you look at a timeline, a lot of Bibles have a timeline in them, some of them don't. If you're really curious, you can, at a bookstore, you can probably pick one up for $1 or something. Um, but the idea is different historians look at things a little bit differently. For instance, um, for the kings up here, a lot of historians, if you look at when you look at the timeline they build, there's an overlap between um, Hezekiah at the end of toward the end of his reign, his son Manasseh was kind of joint ruling with him. And so a lot of times there's an overlap there. And when people talk about Manasseh as an example, how long he reigned, on my chart, he reigned from 697 to 641 BC. And other people will give you a longer reign for him because they include the front part of that where he was kind of a co-regent with his father. And at the tail end, and his son came in. I guess it's kind of a grooming process, kind of a thing. So those vary a little bit. I tended to go with the shorter time range, which is um, Hezekiah died and his son Manasseh took over. But at that point is generally where on my chart where I started the king's reign. I didn't include the overlapping years. Now the prophets on this chart, I did it kind of the opposite of what a lot of people do. We generally know, with two exceptions, we know exactly when a prophet started his ministry because it'll say in the year that King Uzziah died, or in the 13th year of this king. We don't know when they ended because it doesn't say, okay, I'm done. you know. So in the chart that I put together here, you can see Hosea is Hosea is very long, right? If you look at most charts, it has a much shorter range for him because the historians have looked at that and tried to estimate when his ministry stopped, not when he died necessarily, because that's not always the same thing. Um, I tended to go more or less with her from the time they started prophesying uh, till I think it seems that their life ended. Now, on the other chart that I put together that I passed out this morning, this thing, um, on this one, the time of each prophet is much shorter. This one is more in line with what you'd see on most timelines. Okay. Because I turned this is actually a copy of paper I turned in when I was taking classes in Columbia Bible College, and this is what the professor wanted it to look like. So I made it look like the professor wanted it to look like. So not that I disagree with the idea. It's just I just did it differently the second time that I did it. So you've got the same information here. You've got the kings of Judah, and then here are the prophets that basically were talking to Judah. And then down here, we've just got a couple of the kings of Israel, just the last couple, and the prophets that ministered there. If you go back, we go back up here for a minute. Way back over here is the founding of the kingdom of Israel. We're going to talk about what that means later. But it was founded with Saul. And then David took over, and then Solomon took over, and then it all fell apart. Okay. When it fell apart here with Rehoboam, Jeroboam became the king of the northern kingdom. In the prophets, we're going to run across the name Jeroboam. This is not who they're talking about. This is Jeroboam the first. What the prophets are talking about is this guy down here, Jeroboam 2. And if you'll see Amos, for instance, Hosea and Jonah all started their prophecy during Jeroboam 2 in Israel. Okay. So that becomes really important because you got to understand which king they're talking to so you understand what the situation was. If you're going to interpret what the prophets meant when they issued the prophecy, you've got to understand the situation they're talking to. Okay. So when you look at these two timelines, let's go back down here to this guy. When you look at these timelines, basically there's two. There's Israel, meaning the northern kingdom, and there's Judah, meaning the southern kingdom. Okay. Israel, usually probably more than 9 times out of 10, when a prophet says Israel, he's talking to the northern kingdom. Before the split, Israel meant the whole place. And so occasionally one of the prophets will say Israel, but he'll mean the entire kingdom. And you can generally tell from the context of what he says, what they mean. It's generally not confusing, but it is something that we have to be aware of. Now, I asked this question last week. Which of these two timelines is more important, the northern kingdom or the southern kingdom? The southern kingdom. And the next question was why? The southern kingdom, Judah, is the line of David. That's where the Messiah came from. It's also where Jerusalem is. Okay. And if you've read Kings and you've read Chronicles, Second Chronicles, First and Second Kings, all address these kingdoms. And they talk about every single king in the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. Sometimes they don't say much. You know, King so-and-so died and his son reigned in his place, and his mother's name was this, and he did evil in the sight of the Lord, and everything that he did is now written in these other books, which we don't have copies of. The end. I mean, some of them, that's all they got, right? Some of them, you get a lot of information about. So it just varies a little bit. But Second Chronicles and First and Second Kings are written about the kings. They start out, like I just said, so-and-so became king. His mother's name was this. So she was the daughter of this person. And then they'll describe stuff. More, again, how much varies. But it's important when you look at this to realize, this is something else we touched on it in this after class conversation last week. Who are the prophets talking to? The prophets are talking to the king. Now, it applies to the people, but the king was who God worked through in that kingdom, in Israel and Judah. And you'll see this over and over and over. So-and-so became king and he did evil according to, along the line of Jeroboam or Manasseh or whoever, and he caused the people to sin. The king, the leader, led the people into sin, or he led them to follow the Lord. Okay? God worked through the king. Now, United States, we're going to do a comparison of the United States and Israel, I hope today. Um, United States, things tend to be bottom up. We're a democratic republic. We elect our leaders and then our leaders lead. But we're the ones that put them in place. That was not true in Israel. The Israelites didn't get together 4 years and elect a king. Okay. The kings, it was inherited basically, or taken by force. You see both of them. More taken by force in the northern kingdom. You didn't see a lot of that in the southern kingdom. But even where it happened, it was going from one person to his brother or from father to son. It stayed within the Davidic line. Okay. So when you look at a king, okay, we're going to talk about Amos first. So Amos, right here, was in the time of Jeroboam. So did Jeroboam follow the Lord? Did the people follow? What was the spiritual condition in Israel at that point? What was the political condition in Israel at that point? In the northern kingdom, and this is cut off from the thing I put in, it's cut off from here. It's this little piece right here where it starts out rebellious. Okay. Remember, the northern kingdom rebelled against Rehoboam. So they started off rebellious. And it pretty much just went downhill from there. If you could see what I had on here, it's like little steps, and it just goes down. There's no up to it. Up here, you see a similar thing. It goes down, but when you get into Hezekiah, was Hezekiah a good king? You guys remember Hezekiah? Hezekiah was a good king. He followed the Lord. So you get an uptick not only in the spiritual condition, but in the political, military, because the Bible says the Lord blessed him and gave him peace. Okay. And then his son, Ammon, came in and he did not follow the Lord. And so everything starts sliding back down. Okay. Not Ammon, I'm sorry. Manasseh. Manasseh was arguably the worst king in Judah ever. Okay. And I mentioned this last week. He was taken captive and taken away for a while. And while he was away, he repented. He saw what he was doing wrong, and he went back. And that's why right here there's a little uptick in the spiritual condition, not the military condition, but spiritual condition. And then his son came in, Ammon, and again he was the pits. He remembered what his father had been like, not what he was at the end, and that's how he lived. You get down here to Josiah. Again, Josiah was somebody who followed the Lord with his whole heart. And so you see an uptick in the spiritual condition and an uptick in the political or military situation. Again, God gave him peace. Okay. But when you get down to these prophets down here talking about the Babylonian exile, they will point back to Manasseh as the reason when God finally just lost his patience. And like, that's just it. Okay. Why? Because he sacrificed human sacrifices in Jerusalem, in the temple. They would have burnt offerings of people. They built altars to Baal in the temple. Just vile. Okay. And that was when God made it clear through his prophets, like, okay, we're pretty much done at this point. So the trend overall in both kingdoms is down. Now, again, Northern Kingdom had a couple upticks. Southern Kingdom didn't have, Southern Kingdom had a couple upticks. The Northern Kingdom never had an uptick. They did have a couple of places, I guess, it probably be safe to say kind of leveled out. Didn't get worse, but it never really got better. Okay. So I talked about crisis A, the Assyrian invasion. I talk about crisis B, it's a Babylonian invasion. Which of those two is more significant? Which kingdom is more important? All right. So the Assyrian invasion really was against the northern kingdom, pardon me, and the Babylonian invasion was against the southern, because the northern kingdom was gone by that point. Right. So if the southern kingdom is the more important one, which I agree with, then the Babylonian crisis B, is more significant. But to understand that, we've got to go back to the beginning. Okay, because when we get done today, got about 20 minutes. When we get done today, I really want you to understand this point. Okay. So if we go back to the beginning, I think we talked week one about the history of Israel. The history of Israel, or the history in the Bible, let me put it that way, more accurate, starts with Adam and goes through what? What's the end of the historical books in the Bible? Ezra and Nehemiah, that time. Esther is also a historical book. Okay. And that's the last really piece of history we get. Now in Kings, you see stuff about what the kings did and everything, but it's not really those aren't really considered history at that point. It's just kind of a narrative to describe what the kings are doing. Okay. So most of us, when we say history, we think of usually a written record of what man does. It's his story. I heard in school one time, history is his story. It's the record of what men do. It's what society does. You really cannot understand what happened here if you don't take a different perspective on this. Okay. What we're going to talk about is not a record of what men do or what society does. Look at Genesis chapter 12. Okay. And the first 11 chapters, what we see is how messed up man is. They had this perfect place they lived, Adam and Eve. And as somebody said, then Eve ate them out of house and home. All right. But sin was caught by Adam. Adam was where our sin nature comes through, not Eve. In chapter 12, we see God start to, and I'm not saying God wasn't involved. Obviously, he was in the garden, he created everything. But in chapter 12, we see God start to operate. Okay. And this no longer is a record of what man does, it becomes a record of what God does. And if you can understand that, you can start to comprehend why the Babylonian captivity is one of the most significant events in all of history. Seriously, it is right up there, not ahead of, but right up there with the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus Christ. It is that significant. But if you keep looking at history, because you've all read those books I mentioned a minute ago, right? And it's like, yeah, you know. No, it's not yeah. It's really critically important. So look at this. We're going to look at the first three verses, Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 through 3. Now the Lord said to Abram, get out of your country, from your family, and from your father's house to a land I will show you. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you, and I will make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse him who curses you. And in you, all the families of the earth are going to be blessed. Okay. Now, in those three verses, do you hear anything about what God's going to do? That's all that is. All right. It's I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, right? God said, I'm going to do it. And he starts his work with this one man, Abram. I'm going to do it. I'll use you, but I'm going to do it. God is going to make something. What's he going to make? What's he say I'm going to make? A nation, a great nation, not just your run-of-the-mill nation, a great nation. Do you notice here, he doesn't say, I'm going to send a great savior? Okay. Now we, from our position, know that's where this led to, but he didn't say that. He says, I'm going to make you a great nation. He doesn't say, by the way, I'm going to make a great church. He says, Abram, I'm going to take you, I'm going to make out of you a great nation. So he says, I'm going to make a great nation, and then do what? What's the last thing God said in those three sentences, those three verses? I'm going to make you a great nation, and then what's the very last sentence? You remember? You're at a disadvantage if you're not looking at the Bible. I'm going to bless all the families of the earth through you. Okay. Now you've heard me talk about top line, bottom line theology. The top line here is I'm going to bless you, Abram. I'm going to make you a great nation. Bottom line theology is the why. Okay. It's vertical and horizontal. Vertical, I'm going to bless you, Abram. Horizontal, through you, I'm going to bless everybody. If you go through your Bible, and you've heard me say this before, I know. Go through your Bible and you look at the different places that we tend to key on, like, oh, God promised to do this. Okay, he did. Why? Underneath that, the next verse or two down, is almost always a horizontal statement. I'm going to do this so that you can do this, or that I can do this through you. Okay. Okay. So, Abram, I'm going to make you a great nation. And through that great nation, I'm going to bless all the people in the world. Now, again, we see that as a prophecy of the Messiah. Okay. But let's don't skip to that yet. Let's not spiritualize this yet. What's a nation? When I say nation, what comes to your mind? It's a group of people. Okay. What else? When you talk about the United States, what says the United States is a nation? We're a group of people. Very disparate group of people. I mean, there's a whole lot of different kinds of us, but we're a people. A government. We have a common government. Okay. Land. Those are the three elements that make up a nation. If you actually look up the definition, it says something like a body of people inhabiting a specific area under a common form of government. Those are the three elements of a nation. You don't have to speak the same language, although that helps. Okay. You don't have to vote the same. That wouldn't help if y'all voted the same. But now, think back to those three verses we just read. Did God talk to Abram, excuse me, about people? Yeah. Okay. What did he say about it? What did he say about people?
He's going to take them to a land.
We mentioned land. We'll get to that in a second. But he basically says, I'm going to make you a great nation. I'm going to bless you and bless those who curse you. So in order to have a nation, you got to have people. Okay. That's what the whole thing about Abram and having Isaac was all about. If he doesn't have an heir, where do people come from? And that's also, again, that's kind of a fine point right there where Satan attacked, right? Because he's trying to interfere with all this. So that's people. What did he say about land? Did he talk to Abraham about land? To the land I will show you. Now later, he says, everything you see, I'm going to give you. But even in this opening paragraph, he says, I'm going to take you to a land. Okay. And then Lastly, did he talk to Abraham about government? In these verses, not exactly specifically, but he in following verses they do talk about that. So what was Israel under the time of David? Let's just focus on David. Was that a nation according to the definition that we had? Were there people? Yeah, a bunch of them. Was there land? Yeah, there was. Was there a common form of government? What was the common form of government? Pardon? Well, yeah, King David. Now, this next sentence is really important. Israel is a theocracy. Was not sure it is now. It was a theocracy, which means God, Theo, God, ruled them. He ruled them through an instrument. That instrument was the king. God chose to do stuff. He did it through the king. That's why it's important we understand the prophets were most of what the prophet said was directed at the king. Okay. Because they originally didn't have a king, right? They had what? They had prophets and judges. Okay. And then eventually they had Saul and then David and then all this stuff we have up on the screen. Okay. So was it a nation? Yeah, it was. Israel is the only nation like this. Okay. Where did the people come from? They came from Abraham, from Isaac, from Jacob, also known as Israel. Okay. That is a promise of God and a blessing of God. Where'd the land come from? From God. He said, I'm going to give this to Israel is the only nation in the world that was given a deed to the land by God himself. And where did the kings come from? The kings were selected by God. Samuel anointed both Saul and David under the direction of God. Okay. So there was a book that came out, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago called The Harbinger. I don't know if you ever read that. It's a really interesting book. It draws analogies and parallels between the United States and Israel, ancient Israel. And it's really interesting. But let's talk about the United States as a nation. Is the United States a nation? Yeah, we have people, we have land, we have government. Okay. Are we a great nation? I think so. Okay. Do we have ups and downs? Yeah. Some days were greater than other days, but I think generally speaking, we're a great nation. Okay. So does that put us on a par with Israel? Like the guy that wrote the Harbinger, I'm not sure the guy that wrote the Harbinger was saying we're the same as Israel. He was just drawing parallels. But it's been a long time since I read that book. What what are the differences between the United States and the nation that God built for Abraham? Okay. Think about that for a minute. Did God appear to George Washington in Philadelphia and say, George, here's all this land, right? God gave Israel the land. Where did we get our land from? Stole it from the Indians. When I was going through this class with Dr. Hatch, the Cherokee, I guess it was probably North Carolina they were suing for reparations over the land that was taken. But anyway, so anyway, God didn't say, here's the land. And oh, by the way, I'm going to drive everybody out ahead of you and stuff like that. He didn't do that for us, right? Our people came from all over the place. We are really a hodgepodge, a melting pot of people. Okay, are we ruled by God, by a theocracy? No, I honestly do believe. Don't as I go through this, don't doubt my patriotism or my love of the country and that stuff. I just want us to be realistic looking at this, okay, and comparing these two things. I believe that the United States was put here by God for a reason. Okay. And we'll talk about the reasons in a minute, but I think that's important to know. But we are not Israel. We are not God's chosen nation. Okay. Yes, sir.
When the United States was founded, pilgrims, when they came over, they were trying to get away from a lot of stuff that the Christians were going through there when they came over. So it was founded as a Christian nation to start with.
The pundits will tell you that all the stuff about the United States being formed on godly principles is not true, and they will point to Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin particularly. Jefferson and Franklin were, if I can use it as a Jewish idea, were what are called God-fearers. They were not Christians. But if you actually read the stuff that those two guys wrote, you'll see they believed in God. They didn't believe in Jesus, but they believed in God. And if you look up the signers, let's take the Declaration of Independence. You look up the signers of the Declaration of Independence, a large number of those guys were pastors. And a large number of those guys, when they weren't writing the Declaration of Independence or signing it, they were at home writing gospel tracts. All right. So don't let the secular world focusing on these two guys who weren't, I don't disagree with they weren't Christians, but they were God-fearers. Okay. Our nation was founded, I believe, by God, and I believe for a purpose. And our original set of laws. Where did Israel get the laws from? That's another point. Where did Israel get the laws from? Right out of the mouth of God, through his prophet Moses. Where do we get our laws? People, yeah, some of the Ten Commandments, almost, I guess, all the Ten Commandments, mostly, not all, are incorporated in our laws. The Magna Carta was a big part of that. But a lot of our laws are some exotic, like in Decatur, Georgia, it was illegal to tie your horse up. It was against the law to tie your horse up on the courthouse, in the square. It was illegal at one point in Arkansas to mispronounce the name of Arkansas because people were, and I do this, I'll say Arkansas, just to aggravate the people from Arkansas. But it's actually a period of time was illegal to do that. That didn't come from God. All right. So
now if we say the United States was founded by God, is there a nation in the world that is not founded by God?
There was no nation in the world that was not founded by the allowance of God. He allowed those things to happen. I believe that United States was something that was done, God did specifically for a reason. Again, we haven't gotten to the reasons yet, but all things happen with God's permission. The bad stuff happens with God's permission. He allows that to happen for a reason. The good stuff he allows to happen. Sometimes he causes the good stuff to happen. And I believe in the United States case, he caused it to happen. But yeah, he does everything that happens. Happens through his allowance. You can get into a theological discussion, which we're not going to get into today, about permissive will and all that. But I don't want to go down that road right now. And I don't want to make this last statement when we don't have time to talk about it. So we're going to stop right there. Still following up. I thought we would be done with this today, but I talked too much. So we're going to stop with that. And we'll pick back up next week on it.